Okay, so welcome, you know. This one's going to be a little different, right? It's tailored, around this unsettling account you sent over Chloe's story. I mean, solo Airstream trip to the Oregon coast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Powerful story, very evocative.
Yeah.
And focusing specifically on what happened at Sea and Sand RV Park near Depot Bay. And we've got through all those excerpts, a lot to unpack, a lot of strange events.
Definitely. And look, we're not here to say what did or didn't happen, but to really kind of get into Chloe's recounting, and like dig into some of the stranger details and the possible meanings, and then ultimately just sit with the questions that this whole thing leaves us with, right?
Yeah, just trying to understand the nuances, Chloe describes them, and see what resonates with you based on the material you sent over.
So let's start at the beginning. Chloe sets the scene with her, lifelong connection to the ocean, and she brings up her dad, who always said, the ocean talks if you listen. So this idea that the ocean has a voice, that's kind of key to her perspective, right?
Right. It does. It really sets up that framework.
Yeah.
This notion that the natural world can communicate in ways we may not always understand. It's going to color how she interprets events later, for sure.
In her refuge, her way to get away from it all is this Airstream she calls Driftwood. It's a 2011 model, she says, weathered and gray, like something the tide spit out. You can almost feel the coast right there in that description.
Yeah, the Airstream becomes almost like a character in itself. This small space set against this vast, mysterious backdrop. It's her attempt to create safety in an environment that's both comforting and, as we'll see, potentially threatening.
And she chose Sea and Sand RV Park on purpose, right? Central Oregon coast north of Depot Bay. Right between Highway 101 and the Pacific Terrace sites, ocean views. It sounds like the perfect place to unwind, listen to the waves after the noise of the city.
And that's what she's hoping for, right? That soothing rhythm of the sea. But that contrast, with what unfolds is really interesting.
And for every trip, she has this ritual. She puts her dad's old chipped green fishing lure on the dashboard. He gave it to her when she was 11, told her, "It'll hook you home, Chloe." This little detail really stands out, this link to her dad,
Absolutely. It's more than just an object.
Yeah.
It's this connection to safety and comfort. And on a solo trip like this, those kinds of things, they can take on an even bigger meaning.
So she arrives. Rain starts that gentle tapping on the roof of Driftwood. She's up on a high terrace ocean stretching out dark below her. And at first, it's exactly what she wanted. Tea rain, that calming sea. But then something changes.
Right. And it's subtle, but it's important. She notices those familiar sounds are gone. The gulls, the wind. It's just the rain and the waves, almost like in sync. This quiet, in what's usually a lively soundscape, can be unsettling, like something's off.
And then she hears it, her nickname Chloe, soft and wet. And she says it came from the beach. But what's really chilling is she says it sounded like her dad's voice. He passed away 7 years ago.
Yeah, that's where things go from, unusual to something else, right? The nickname, the voice that taps into her past and her emotions. Could it be some kind of auditory pareidolia? Her mind primed by memories, and the quiet interprets the waves a certain way. It's possible.
That's a good point. She does say she always feared the ocean at night. Not the water, but what might be hidden. Her dad used to tease her about mermaids. Now those childhood fears, they seem to be resurfacing.
Yeah, and that contrast between those innocent fears and the reality she might be facing makes her even more vulnerable. Like the lines between fantasy and reality are blurring.
So she tries to rationalize it, right? It's just the surf, she tells herself. She even records the sound on her phone, maybe hoping to hear something normal that'll calm her down.
Trying to get some proof, some objective evidence. Trying to control the situation when she's starting to feel like she's losing control.
But when she listens back, it's not what she expected at all. It's her nickname, Chloe, woven into this low, gurgling hum. She describes it as a voice coming from underwater. I mean, that's vivid and scary.
Yeah. Now, it's harder to explain it away, right? The initial sound, maybe, but the recording confirms something strange. The gurgling makes it otherworldly, like it's from somewhere else entirely.
She's shaken, obviously. First thing she does, she checks the locks on Driftwood. It's basic, right? When you feel threatened, you secure your space, and everything is locked. But then she sees it. The fishing lure. The one she put on the dashboard. Now it's hooked into the carpet. She knows she didn't move it.
And that's something you can't just explain away. The lure moved inside her locked Airstream. Something had to move it. It's like the laws of physics are breaking down around her.
And then she remembers something the gas station clerk in Depot Bay had said. He'd mentioned Sea and Sand being too close to the water, that things call out sometimes. At the time, she dismissed it, local talk.
Yeah, we do that, right? Dismiss those local stories until something happens to you.
Yeah.
And now those words sound ominous. Like there's a history of strange things happening there. Could also be that the suggestion planted a seed, even before anything happened.
She's uneasy, so she looks at the park brochure again. You know, the usual stuff, beach access, whale watching. But then there's a mention of an old shipwreck offshore. A fishing boat lost in '59, the whole crew vanished. And there's this handwritten note in the margin. They still sing.
The shipwreck adds another layer, right? This historical tragedy. And it could be a source for those voices, linking Chloe's experience to something much older and sad. And that note adds to that sense of local folklore.
No way she's sleeping now. The storm gets worse, rain pounding on driftwood. She says it felt like it was rocking the airstream, looking for comfort. She turns on her dad's old battery-powered radio, this old thing she keeps for emergencies. Just static at first, which she finds comforting.
Yeah, that's it's familiar. You
Yeah.
know, it's grounding in a situation that's getting stranger and stranger.
But then the static changes, it warps, and then a voice cuts through. You're here now. It's directed right at her, and then right after she hears this loud splash outside close by like someone stepped into a puddle next to driftwood.
That voice, it takes things to a whole new level, right? Now it's not just sounds, it's communication.
Oh.
And that splash, it makes it feel like there's something right outside.
She has to get out of there. She tries to start driftwood key in the ignition, but the engine just coughs and dies. Battery's dead.
Yeah.
Makes no sense. She used it earlier with no problem.
Now she's trapped. Or her escape route is gone.
Yeah.
It really increases that feeling of vulnerability. And it makes you wonder, is this just bad luck? Or is something else happening?
Rain's pouring down windows, fogged up, phone's useless, no signal, battery dying. She's cut off completely. She yells out into the darkness, "Leave me alone!" And all she hears is the waves crashing.
That cry for help and nature just doesn't care. You know, it really emphasizes her isolation and the power of whatever she's up against.
Then the motion light outside flickers on, just for a second illuminating the darkness. She checks the feed on her phone, and in that flash of light, she sees a figure standing at the edge of the terrace, slumped over soaked. And as she watches, it slowly turns its head, and she says its eyes glinted like fish scales.
Now there's a visual, right? Something's there. It's not just sounds, it's real and terrifying. And those eyes, like fish scales, that adds to the feeling that this is not human.
She grabs the CB radio, calls her brother Sam back in Eugene. She gets a broken message out. "Sam, I'm at Sea and Sand. Something's here. Help!" She thinks she hears him say something about getting the Rangers, but then static.
Another failed attempt to get help makes her feel even more alone. And that static, was it just bad reception or something else?
And then something truly unsettling. 3 slow knocks on the side of the airstream. Tap, tap, tap. It was her dad's signal the way he used to knock when he came back from fishing.
Chilling, right?
Yeah.
Someone or something knows that. Knows about her past. It's like it's using that to scare her.
Terrified, she looks through the blinds. There's a shape standing below in the rain, head tilted up, looking right at her airstream. She closes the blinds and stumbles back. Almost without thinking, she reaches under the table. It was her hiding spot as a kid. And there it is, scratched into the wood, CLO, wet and fresh.
That's a violation, right? Her name in her safe space. It's like whatever's outside is now inside with it.
The knocking gets louder, heavy thuds, shaking the whole airstream. She grabs her dad's fishing lure and the hook's digging into her palm, and it feels ice cold.
The lure, that connection to her dad,
Right.
it's now a source of pain. That coldness, it can be real, or maybe it's just her fear.
But then something changes in Chloe. She realizes she can't just hide. She remembers her dad teaching her to stand up to fight back when you're scared.
It's a turning point. She's not passive anymore. She's taking control.
She grabs her flashlight and a wrench from her toolbox, a heavy wrench she uses for repairs. Holding the lure in one hand, feeling that coldness, she yells, "I'm not yours," and then silence. Dead silence.
Her defiance, it seems to stop everything for a moment. That silence, it's almost worse than the sounds.
She goes outside, cautiously wrench raised. The air is thick with salt, but also the smell of rot and seaweed. The figure's gone, but there on the gravel are deep claw marks leading down to the beach.
It's proof.
Yeah.
What happened wasn't in her head.
Yeah.
And that smell, it adds to the feeling that this is something not of this world.
She shines her light on the waves. Another wave crashes, and she sees something in the foam. Long and dark, then it's gone. Back inside, she locks the door, and she replays the motion light feed. And as she watches, a voice whispers in her ear, "You called me." It's not her voice. It's wet hollow like the sound of the waves.
A voice on the recording responding to her. It's like it's aware, it's interacting with her through technology. And that connection to the ocean sounds. It's blurring the lines between natural and something else.
Now, all those stories her dad told her come back to her. Stories of fishermen hearing their names called out on the water only to be pulled under. He always laughed, but she remembers something else in his eyes, a flicker of unease.
Those stories, those legends, They exist for a reason, right? They reflect the deep respect and fear of the power of the ocean.
The figure comes back. This time it's right against driftwood claws scraping on the metal, screeching. She swings the wrench, yells at it to go away. It stops. Then its claws rake across the roof. And then this high-pitched wail.
The airstream, her sanctuary, it's under attack. And that wail, it's not human. It's something else.
And then this terrifying moment. She glances at the lure, and in its reflection, she sees herself. But behind her inside, Driftwood is a hunched, shadowy figure. She spins around, throws the wrench, but there's nothing there. The radio on the counter, it's not plugged in, but it crackles to life. A voice whispers, "You're mine to keep." She smashes the radio, and then silence again. Deep and unsettling.
The reflection in the lure, it's like whatever's outside is somehow inside too.
Yeah.
That voice from the unpowered radio,
Yeah.
that defies all logic. This is a beyond explanation.
She doesn't remember the rest of the night, but when dawn comes, the storm eases and Driftwood starts right up, like nothing happened.
Right.
She drives home to Eugene in shock. When she gets there, she collapses exhausted, but the fear stays with her. Later, she finds sand in the carpet, and then she sees them, thin-webbed claw prints around her bed in her home.
Whatever she encountered, it followed her home, right? Those marks in her home, that's a violation. It's like it's claiming her space.
There's one last video on her phone. She doesn't remember recording it. It shows her asleep in bed, a dark shadow leaning over her whispering, "Chloe." And then she notices the itching, faint, wet-looking scars start to appear on her arms. And she says they look like the claw marks from Sea and Sand.
The video, the marks, it's not just psychological anymore. There's a physical element to this. It's like whatever she met, it touched her.
She starts researching local history, anything to understand what happened. She hears whispers about the 59 shipwreck, the fishing boat lost in a storm. There are radio calls for help going unanswered. She finds old logs that mention stranger voices in the waves near that area, even names carved on driftwood. She talks to Sam again. He confirms his CB was silent that night when she called, and he tells her something he'd never told anyone. Years ago, fishing near Depot Bay, he heard his own name called out in the tide. Just a moment, but it shook him.
It's not just her, right? Other people have experienced strange things there. Local history, her brother's experience, it validates her story in a way.
The lure sits on her shelf now. She says sometimes even when it's dry, it feels damp. The wrench has these tiny notches in the metal, even though she didn't hit anything solid. She's not the same. She flinches at the sound of running water, sleeps with a bowl of salt by her bed, like some kind of protection. Then a week later, she finds a shell under her door, scratched inside CLO, cold and damp.
The effects are lasting, right?
What?
So
Yeah.
the shell with her name, it's like a
Yeah.
connection remains, and that shell appearing at her home, it means it followed her.
She's terrified. She calls Sam. They burn the shell together, trying to break that connection. But even now, she says, when it rains, especially at night, she hears it through her window. Chloe, soft, wet, like something's still waiting.
That final image, it leaves you with this feeling of unease, like it's not over. It makes you wonder, what are these things, and can you ever really escape them?
So just to recap the voice calling her name, the objects moving the marks left behind, and the connection to the shipwreck, it's all very unsettling.
It is, and it leaves us with so many questions. What was calling Chloe? It was the lost crew, and why her? What was the lure's role in all this?
And you listening might be thinking a lot of things right now. Disbelief, intrigue, maybe even fear. And it's all valid. Chloe's story, it touches on something deep, something we don't fully understand.
It makes us question what's real, what's possible, and the idea that the past can echo in the present. You know, those boundaries between the living and the maybe not so living, especially in places where tragedy has happened.
So here's something to think about. We have these categories, right? Folklore, superstition, personal experience. But what if they're not so separate? What if those stories we dismiss as just stories have some truth to them? Some echo of real events that keeps happening, especially in those in-between places like the coast. And maybe if we really listened not just to the waves, but to the stories in the wind and the echoes of what came before, what might the ocean be trying to tell us?
I think that's a question we all have to answer for ourselves.
You know, there's a lot to think about. Thanks for joining this deep dive. And until next time, keep listening.
And keep an open mind. Okay, so you out there listening, you requested this deep dive, and we aim to please. So we're focusing on you and this unsettling experience you had at Harris Beach State Park, right on the southern Oregon coast. You went solo in your RV, seeking some solitude, and you sent us your personal account. It really lays out how a simple trip turned into something pretty strange. So our mission here is to really dig into those events, pick out those key details, and then explore some potential ways of understanding what happened. But we're going to keep it tight, Keep it focused. And of course, keep it fascinating for you.
Absolutely. And Noah, your account here is really vivid. It gives us a very clear picture. So what we're going to do is carefully go through it, almost like peeling back layers to reveal the core. It's going to help us understand the whole sequence of events, and we'll be highlighting the elements that strike us as particularly significant or unusual.
Okay, let's jump right in. You were looking for some peace, some much-needed peace and quiet after a rough time. And Harris Beach, with its oceanfront campsites and those striking sea stacks, it just seemed like the perfect escape. You had Haven, your trusty 2007 Fleetwood Bounder. You described it as your sanctuary. And you parked right there near the bluff with that vast Pacific stretching out in front of you.
Right off the bat, Harris Beach, just north of Brookings. That's a concrete detail that anchors your story. The bluff, the sea stacks, they're not just background scenery, they're actually going to become part of what unfolds. And your state of mind when you arrived, that desire for solitude, maybe even a sense of vulnerability after your divorce. Now that sets the stage for everything that follows.
And you had this really touching ritual. The very first thing you did was place your mother's laminated tide chart right there on the dashboard. This chart. She gave it to you when you were just 13. And along with it came some incredibly wise advice. She said, it'll guide you back. No, it's a small object. But it obviously carries a lot of meaning for you, a sense of personal history and safety.
Absolutely. That tide chart is more than just a tool for navigation. It's a symbol. It represents connection, guidance, a link to a comforting past. So when it appears later in your account, altered in some unsettling ways, well, that initial meaning amplifies the impact. It's like something familiar is being distorted.
Exactly. So that first night rolls around and a rainstorm sets in. And initially you felt this sense of calm, the rhythmic drumming of rain on the RV roof, the distant sounds of the ocean. But then this peace, it dissolves into this really unnerving stillness. You specifically remember the lack of the usual coastal sounds. There were no barking seals, no wind rustling through the trees, just the rain and the waves. You described them as having this eerie harmony, that silence. It must have been deafening in its own way.
You're absolutely right. It's often the absence of those expected sounds, those sensory inputs. That triggers our awareness that something's off. You know the coastal environment well, and its deviation from the norm. It would have subtly signaled that something wasn't quite right, creating a sense of unease. Even before those more overt events began, it's like that primal part of our brain, noticing a disruption in the natural order of things.
Then comes the first truly bizarre event. You're trying to relax, maybe working on a crossword puzzle, and suddenly you hear your nickname. No. And you were certain it sounded like your deceased mother's voice.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be coming from the direction of the bluff. I mean, for anyone who's experienced loss, that would be profoundly unsettling.
Without a doubt, losing a parent leaves a deep emotional imprint. And to hear their voice so suddenly, especially your nickname, in such an isolated and unexpected setting, that would be incredibly jarring. It blurs the lines between memory and the present moment, and the fact that it seemed to be coming from outside. From the bluff, that immediately introduces an element of external and unknown intrusion.
Which makes sense why it tapped into this lifelong fear of yours, this feeling of being watched, this vulnerability that goes all the way back to your childhood. You first tried to explain it away as the wind. That's a totally natural human response, trying to find a logical explanation for something that just doesn't make sense. But then you grabbed your phone and decided to record, maybe looking for some objective confirmation. But what you capture is anything but reassuring.
What's interesting here is your instinct to use technology to validate or dismiss your experience. But instead of finding a simple explanation, the recording reveals something even stranger. There's your nickname, clear as day. But mixed in with this deep, rumbling groan, you said it sounded like a voice carved from the rocks. This takes the experience beyond just a subjective auditory hallucination, at least in your mind, and it introduces this potentially physical, almost geological element to the sound.
Things then take a really quick turn. You instantly check all the RV logs. That's such a natural reaction when you feel like your safety might be compromised. And then you notice the tide chart. It's been flipped over to a date in 1984. You distinctly remember leaving it on the current date. This isn't a sound or a feeling. It's a tangible manipulation of an object that's deeply personal to you. It feels like a deliberate act.
Absolutely. That flipped tide chart, it signifies a shift from sensory anomalies to a physical interaction with your environment. It's no longer just about what you're hearing. Something has interacted with your personal belongings. And that date, 1984. It's intriguing. Does it hold any personal significance? It could be random. A coincidence. Or it could be a meaningful clue in a much larger puzzle. The act itself feels like a form of communication, albeit a very cryptic one.
And then you remember that cryptic warning from the park host. Harris Beach has eyes, don't stay near the bluff too long. What might have seemed like quirky local color at first now takes on this very ominous meaning. You pull out the park map and there's this note about an abandoned lookout tower, closed in 1973 after some unexplained events. And there's a handwritten addition. They see you. It's like the park itself has a hidden dark history.
The park host's warning, the information on that map, they provide a local context that really amplifies your experience. They suggest a pre-existing sense of unease, or maybe even a known history of strange happenings at Harris Beach, especially around the bluff and that abandoned tower. Unexplained events. It's vague. But it hints at something beyond the ordinary. And that handwritten note, it mirrors your growing feeling of being watched. It suggests that others may have experienced something similar, or even witnessed something.
That night spirals into something truly terrifying. Sleep deprivation starts to take its toll. Then your mom's old wind-up flashlight. That source of comfort in its familiarity begins to dim, and right at that moment you hear another voice. This one clearer, you shouldn't be here. This feels like a direct message, almost territorial.
The malfunctioning flashlight at that exact moment adds another layer of the uncanny to this. Whether it was just old batteries or something more, within the context of everything else happening, it feels significant. And that message itself, it's direct, it's exclusionary, reinforcing that idea that your presence is unwanted, even forbidden. It's a challenge to your sense of safety.
And the physical events continue to escalate. A soup pole suddenly smashes inside the RV, followed by these slow, heavy scratching sounds on the side, like claws scraping across metal. It's no longer just sounds in the distance. They're impacting your immediate space, violating the perceived safety of Haven.
Right? These physical manifestations really ramp up that sense of threat, that shattered bowl. It feels like a violent intrusion into your sanctuary, even though you didn't see how it happened. Those scratching sounds, they're primal, unsettling, evoking images of something animalistic or something else entirely. Trying to get in, it's a violation of your physical boundaries.
Then comes your attempt to escape, which is completely thwarted. Haven's engine fails. The lights flicker out. Your phone rapidly loses signal. It's as if the RV itself is being held captive, isolating you even further.
That mechanical failure at such a critical moment raises so many questions. Was it a coincidence, a random malfunction, or was there something preventing your escape? The sudden loss of phone signal isolates you even more, cutting off any chance of calling for help. That feeling of being trapped and utterly helpless would have been terrifying, amplifying that sense of vulnerability.
The motion camera you set up outside then triggers, and the footage reveals this hunched, jagged figure on the edge of the bluff, and you saw its cracked shell eyes fixed directly on Haven. Seeing that visual confirmation that something was out there watching you must have been a profound shock, turning your fear into a tangible threat.
That visual confirmation, that's a pivotal point in your story. It moves the experience from the realm of just your perceptions to something captured by technology. The description of that figure, hunched and jagged, those unsettling, cracked shell eyes, it's incredibly disturbing and suggests something unnatural, or at the very least profoundly strange. That direct gaze at the RV, it reinforces that feeling of being watched with intention.
You're desperate. So you grab your CB radio, their old reliable backup for when cell service fails, and you try to reach your friend Jess. The response is garbled. You hear her mention calling the Rangers, and then static. You're completely cut off from the outside world. Even that old technology fails you, underscoring your isolation.
The CB radio, it was your last potential lifeline to the outside world. And it failing just emphasizes that feeling of being utterly alone, beyond the reach of any conventional help. Jess's partial message, it confirms you got through. But the abrupt silence, it leaves the outcome uncertain, fueling that growing sense of dread and abandonment.
Then comes the knocking. 4 soft taps. But in this very specific rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. You immediately recognize your mother's unique way of checking on you when you were a kid. It's such a personal detail, and so chilling. It's like a gesture of maternal comfort twisted into something truly unsettling. And through the rain, you see shape on the bluff, still and watching. It's like something has an intimate knowledge of your past.
The fact that it mimics your mother's knocking, that's particularly disturbing. It suggests an awareness of your personal history, a deliberate attempt to exploit your deepest emotional connections, your vulnerabilities. The visual of that shape through the rain, it reinforces that constant surveillance, that feeling of being targeted.
Inside Haven, you discover something truly disturbing, scratched into the floor, right under your bunk. The word no. You said it looked fresh, even damp. This is no longer a distant sound. It's a tangible, undeniable act of intrusion into your most personal space. And the use of your nickname, again, feels like a direct and almost taunting message. The knocking then escalates into aggressive banging, as if it's frustrated by your lack of response.
That scratching of no inside the RV, that's a major escalation, a violation of your sanctuary, the fact that it was fresh, damp. It suggests it happened very recently, maybe while your attention was focused elsewhere. It's a clear message, right there in your personal space. The shift to aggressive banging, it could indicate growing intensity, or even anger from whatever is outside.
And something shifts in you at that moment. You decide you've had enough. You can't just cower in fear. You remember your mother's advice to stand your ground, to face your fears head on. You grab that old flashlight and a crowbar, and you hold at the tide chart, that symbol of her guidance. You shout into the storm, "I'm not afraid." It's a powerful moment of resistance against the unknown.
It's a turning point. That decision to confront the unknown, armed with those familiar objects, the crowbar for protection, the tide chart as a symbol of strength. Remembering your mother's lesson gives you back a sense of control in a situation where you felt powerless. That defiant shout, it's a powerful assertion. You're refusing to be terrorized.
And instantly, the banging stops. An almost unnatural silence descends, broken only by the steady rhythm of the rain. You step outside, crowbar in hand, into the damp, salty air, ready to face whatever's out there.
The fact that everything goes quiet after you confront it, it's significant. It suggests that your actions had an effect, even if you don't know exactly what that effect was, and stepping out into that darkness. Vulnerable, but prepared. It's a remarkable display of courage in the face of fear.
Outside, you find physical evidence. Distinct claw marks raked into the soft earth at the edge of the bluff, leading down towards the beach. And then you catch a glimpse of a tall, shambling figure moving among the dark shapes of the sea stacks. These aren't just impressions. They're tangible signs that what you experienced was real.
Right, the claw marks, that sighting. They offer more validation that this wasn't just in your head. You described the figure as too tall to be right, reinforcing its potentially unnatural nature. The tracks leading down to the beach, they suggest a physical being that can move around and interact with the environment.
Back inside, you lock the door, and the motion camera suddenly starts playing back on its own. And there's another chilling message. "You woke me up." And you said it was spoken in this deep, grinding voice, like it was coming from the tide itself. It feels like a direct response to your confrontation, an acknowledgement of your defiance.
That message suggests a level of awareness, a reaction to your actions. And the voice being described as coming from the tide itself. It adds a primal, almost elemental quality to whatever this entity is, as if it's connected to the natural environment of Harris Beach. It's a possessive, territorial statement.
And this suddenly brings back all those stories your mother used to tell. Local lore you'd always dismissed as fanciful. About campers feeling watched, even vanishing without a trace at Harris Beach. And her own unease whenever these tales came up. It seems like those stories might have been more than just stories.
That you recall these stories right now, it's a crucial connection. It suggests that your experience might not be isolated, that it could be part of a longer history of unusual events at Harris Beach, her unease. Even when dismissing the tales, hints at a deeper understanding, maybe even a past encounter that stayed with her. It places your experience within this broader local narrative.
The assault on Haven starts up again, this time more intense. The figure slams against the side of the RV, claws rake across the roof, and you hear this guttural wail, like a sound of pure anguish or rage. It's as if your defiance has provoked it further.
The fact that the attack resumes with more force, it shows a persistent and aggressive presence. The sounds you describe, the slamming, the raking claws, that wail, it paints a picture of something trying to get in, to intimidate you, maybe fueled by anger at your resistance.
Then there's this incredibly personal and terrifying moment with the tide chart. You see your own reflection in the laminated surface, but there's a shadowy figure crouched behind you inside Haven. You spin around, but there's nothing there. Then, inexplicably, the flashlight flares to life on its own, illuminating a final chilling message. You're mine to watch. And you smash the flashlight in terror. That feeling of a presence inside your sanctuary, it must have been unbearable.
This moment is especially distorting because it involves a visual manifestation inside your RV, a direct violation of your sense of safety. That message, it's possessive, threatening, and the flashlight acting on its own. It adds another layer of the uncanny, suggesting something beyond our understanding is happening here.
You manage to escape in the morning. Haven starts up as if nothing had happened. But the coldness of that tide chart in your hand, it serves as a chilling reminder of the night's terror. Back home, you find more unsettling evidence: seaweed inside the RV, and long twisted claw prints circling your bunk. It's like whatever it was left its mark on you.
That haven works perfectly in the morning. It creates this jarring contrast with the events of the previous night, almost making it feel like a nightmare. But those physical traces, the seaweed, the claw prints inside your space, they confirm that the experience was real, that something might have followed you home.
And in the final piece of this puzzle, that last clip you found on your tablet, when you swear you didn't record, it shows you slumped over your crossword puzzle, completely unaware, with a dark shadow leaning over you, growling, "No." And then the appearance of those thin, sandy scars on your shoulders, they mirror the marks you saw on the bluff. This goes beyond just psychological trauma. It suggests a physical connection to what happened at Harris Beach.
This unexplained footage, those scars on your body, they're perhaps the most disturbing parts of your story. They suggest a direct and potentially lasting impact from whatever you encountered. The fact that the scars mirror those marks on the bluff, it implies a connection between you and that location, a lingering mark of your encounter.
Your investigation into what happened reveals hushed whispers about a disappearance back in 1973 near that abandoned tower. People talk about strange carvings in the sand. And there are recurring reports of watchers in the waves, and names scratched into driftwood. Your friend Jess. She later confessed that her phone really did die that night, and she couldn't reach anyone. The tide chart you brought back, it now curls at the edges, and the tip of the crowbar you took outside is bent, even though you don't remember hitting anything solid with it. All these pieces point to something beyond just your imagination.
Your efforts to find corroboration in local stories, Jess's inability to get help, it reinforces the idea that something unusual and potentially dangerous is connected to Harris Beach. The strange behavior of the tide chart, the damage to the crowbar, they serve as tangible reminders of what happened. Even now, far from that park, these details add a sense of reality and persistence to the whole experience.
Even now, back home,
Yeah.
you're still dealing with the after effects. A heightened sense of fear. You sleep with the door locked. The unsettling discovery of that salt-wet pebble etched with "no." And then Jess's belated and shocking confession. She had her own unnerving experience at Harris Beach years ago, something she never shared with you. And finally, that last auditory encounter, the whisper of "no" coming through your wall during a recent rainstorm. It truly feels like whatever you encountered might have followed you home.
The fact that Jess had a similar experience is significant. It suggests a pattern of unsettling events affecting people at Harris Beach, your ongoing experiences at home. They indicate that the encounter has had a lasting impact, psychologically, and maybe even physically. That final auditory experience, it's a chilling reminder that what happened might not be over.
We've just taken a deep dive into your truly unsettling experience at Harris Beach, based entirely on your account. And what really stands out are those strange occurrences: the disembodied voices, the physical markings, the technology failing, and the chilling sense of intelligence behind it all. There are definitely no easy explanations here, just a lot of unanswered questions.
What's so fascinating is how several things seem to come together here. Your emotional state during the trip, those long-standing local legends surrounding Harris Beach and its history, and the raw, untamed power and isolation of that coastal environment.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Given all those elements, what could explain your experience at Harris Beach? Could there be unseen forces at play, or forgotten histories lingering in those wild places? And how do our own fears and anxieties shape how we perceive the unknown, especially when we find ourselves in such extraordinary circumstances?
All right, so we're diving into something pretty eerie this time.
Yeah, definitely spooky.
Riley's solo camping trip to Cape Lookout State Park.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just a scary story, you know?
Right.
It gets under your skin and stays there.
It does.
And we're gonna explore that, like what could be behind this whole experience.
Yeah.
Whispers, strange sounds, things moving around, that feeling of being watched, like right out of a
Yeah.
horror movie.
What really gets you in Riley's story is how peaceful it starts out,
Yeah.
and then how scary it gets. I mean, it's like a slow burn, this series of weird events that make you wonder, what's real, what's not?
Right.
Like, how much is isolation? How much is your mind playing tricks?
Yeah.
And maybe as Riley thinks, something more is going on.
Right, like something's really out there.
Yeah.
So Riley, who uses they, them pronouns,
Like,
was clearly looking for some peace and quiet,
Huh.
They described their camper van Whisper as like a sanctuary. And Cape Lookout is this beautiful but rugged place.
Oh, yeah. Oregon coast, right?
Yeah, right on the Oregon coast where the forest meets the ocean.
Beautiful.
Campsites tucked in between, it sounds like the
Yes.
perfect getaway.
Oh, yes.
And Riley even brought their grandfather's tin whistle.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, this special object that reminds them of good times, and of their grandfather.
I love that detail about the whistle.
Yeah.
It starts as the symbol of peace,
Right.
family history.
Exactly.
And then when things start getting creepy, the whistle gets involved. It falls down, maybe makes sounds.
Yeah.
It's like whatever's happening is messing with Riley's safe space.
Yeah, it's like even the things that are supposed to be comforting
Right.
aren't safe anymore.
Exactly.
So the first night starts out calm,
Okay.
rain on the roof of the van, chili simmering on the stove.
Nice.
But then this heavy silence falls over the woods.
Ooh. I don't like that.
Yeah, it's like this unnatural silence almost, like something's waiting.
Oh, that's creepy.
And that's when it starts. The whisper.
Oh, no. Okay.
Their grandfather's nickname, a voice they haven't heard in years.
Oh, wow.
Like it's just on the wind.
That would freak me out.
What do you think about that moment, that first whisper?
Well, I mean, it's totally disorienting, right?
Yeah.
And Scary Riley tries to explain it away at first,
Sure.
but it's so personal. You know?
Uh-huh.
That nickname, a loved one, gone.
Right.
It just cuts through any rational explanation.
Totally. And then they think maybe it was an echo or something, so they start recording on their phone.
Right.
But when they play it back,
Yeah.
it's not just the whisper.
Uh-oh.
It's this layered sound. The re is clear, but there's this low growl mixed in with it.
Like a snarl.
Yeah, almost like an animal.
Oh.
That changes things, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
That's not just hearing things anymore.
Right.
That growl, it's something else entirely.
It's like something not human.
Yeah. Or something trying to sound that way.
Exactly. And then things just get weirder.
Okay.
The tin whistle, which was hanging up, falls to the floor for no reason. And then the campground host shows up and gives Riley this warning.
Oh, like a premonition kind of thing?
Yeah, like, Cape Lookout's got ears, don't linger near the trees.
Ooh, that's creepy.
Yeah, and then Riley remembers seeing this abandoned ranger cabin on the map
Okay.
from like 1968, and it had this note scrawled on it. They call back.
Oh, no.
What do you think all these little things add up to?
Well, it's like each thing is a clue leading Riley towards danger. The whistle falling disrupts the feeling of safety in the van.
Right.
The host's warning hints that locals know something's up.
Yeah, like there's more to it than meets the eye.
Exactly. And then that cabin with that creepy message.
Yeah.
It's like a historical connection,
Right.
suggesting this has happened before.
Like it's not the first time.
Yeah. And it plays on our need to find patterns, explanations.
Yeah, even if they're scary.
Especially if they're scary.
And then inside, whisper.
What happens in the van?
Things escalate.
Okay.
The cassette player starts distorting the music.
Oh.
And then this growl comes through the speakers. You're not alone.
Oh, God.
And then Riley's chili spills.
Seriously?
Yeah. And then these loud thumping sounds start outside the van.
Okay, I'm officially freaked out now.
It's like a sensory overload, right?
Yeah, it's like everything's closing in on him.
Exactly. And it all happens in this space that's supposed to be safe.
Right, there's sanctuary.
That distorted voice, the growling, the message, it's direct and threatening.
It is.
And even the spilled chili, it just adds to the feeling that things are going wrong.
Yeah, like their control is slipping.
Exactly. And the thumping outside, it's like something big is out there.
And it wants to get in.
And then the power goes out.
Oh, no.
Complete darkness.
This is a nightmare.
And the phone loses signals.
Because they're totally alone.
Totally isolated. And then in that darkness, the motion sensor light flickers on. And Riley sees this lean, shaggy figure with bright amber eyes at the edge of the trees.
Oh my God, no way.
Yeah, just a glimpse, but they saw it.
That must have been terrifying,
What do you think that does to someone?
seeing something like that.
Yeah, after all the weird sounds and whispers.
It makes it real.
Yeah.
It's not in their head anymore.
Right.
It's a real threat out there.
And it looks like something?
What?
Well, they describe it as lean, shaggy with those amber eyes.
Oof, that just sends chills down my spine.
So Riley tries to use the CB radio to call for help.
Okay.
They manage to get through to their cousin Alex.
Oh, thank goodness.
But the call cuts out mid-sentence, and then
Right.
Riley hears this.
What is it?
3 quick knocks on the side of the van.
Three knocks.
Their grandfather's unique signal.
Wait a minute, their grandfather's dead, right?
Yeah, passed away years ago.
So who's knocking?
Right. such a specific detail.
That is so creepy.
What do you think it means?
I don't know. I mean, in that situation, you'd want to think it's a good sign.
Right? Like help is coming.
Yeah, but given everything else that's happened, it's terrifying.
Like who or what would know that signal?
Exactly. It's like something's playing with them.
Using something personal against them.
Ugh, that's so messed up.
And then it gets even more personal.
What do you mean?
Riley finds their grandfather's nickname, R.I., scratched into the bench of the van.
No way.
Yeah, like someone or something was inside.
That's so violating.
And then the scratching starts again.
Oh, God, not the scratching.
All around the van. And this time, there's this faint sound coming from the tin whistle.
Is it like a tune?
No, just a single note, barely audible.
But the whistle wasn't near the scratching, right?
Right, it was hanging up inside the van.
Then how?
Exactly. It's like whatever's out there is messing with them.
It's like it knows about Riley.
Uh-huh.
About their grandfather.
And it's using it against them.
This is more than just a random haunting or something.
What do you mean?
It feels targeted.
Oh, yeah.
Like Riley's being hunted or something.
Okay, so at this point, Riley decides to fight back.
What, they go outside?
Yeah, they grab a flashlight and a hatchet,
Oh, wow.
step out into the darkness and shout, "I'm not yours."
That's so brave.
And the scratching stops.
Just like that.
Dead silence.
What do you think happened?
I don't know, maybe it was surprised.
Maybe it wasn't expecting Riley to fight back.
Or maybe it was testing them.
Yeah, like seeing how they'd react.
Or maybe it was just Riley taking back some control.
Yeah, facing their fear.
Whatever it was, it stopped.
For a moment.
And outside, Riley finds more evidence.
Like what?
Torn up, ground deep claw marks leading towards the cliffs.
Claw marks.
Yeah, and a quick glimpse of a large, dark figure moving away.
Okay, that's not just in their head anymore.
Right, this is physical evidence.
Something was out there.
Something big.
And it was watching them.
Back inside the vanlord, Riley thinks maybe it's over.
But it's not, is it?
No, the motion light feed on their phone starts playing on its own,
Wait, what?
even though it's not plugged in.
How is that possible?
And this voice comes through the speaker.
The same voice.
No, this one is raw and powerful.
Oh, no.
And it says, "You brought me back."
You brought me back. What does that even mean?
Right, it's like Riley did something.
Yeah, like they triggered this whole thing somehow.
And it makes you think about Riley's grandfather's stories.
About?
Cape Lookout.
Oh, yeah, he used to tell stories about the area, didn't he?
Yeah, stories about hikers hearing strange howls and people disappearing.
And he was always nervous when he told them.
Yeah, like he knew more than he was saying.
Like there was something he wasn't telling.
Right.
So this place has a history.
Yeah, a history of strange events.
Maybe Riley's experience is just the latest chapter.
And then the attacks on the van start up again.
Oh, God.
This time it's worse.
How much worse?
Slamming on the roof, clawing at the windows.
It's trying to get in.
And then Riley sees this reflection in the tin whistle.
A reflection.
Yeah, a shadowy figure inside the van with them.
No.
Like it was already inside.
That's just pure terror.
It is that feeling of being trapped with something you can't see.
I can't even imagine.
So Riley throws the hatchet at the figure.
What happens?
The hatchet hits the wall,
Okay.
and then the unplugged recorder in the van starts playing.
But it's unplugged.
I know it doesn't make sense,
It's impossible.
but it plays this message: you'll never sleep.
It's taunting them.
Yeah, and then silence again.
The recorder playing unplugged. How do you even explain that?
It's like something's messing with technology.
Or maybe it's something we don't understand about energy.
Well, consciousness.
Yeah, it's beyond our current science.
Even the message itself.
It's terrifying.
It knows Riley's scared.
Yeah, it knows they won't be able to sleep.
And then finally at dawn, Riley escapes.
In a van.
Yeah, Whisper starts up without any problem.
After all that.
But when Riley gets home, they
Yeah.
find pine needles and huge claw prints inside the van.
So something was definitely in there.
Something physical.
It wasn't just Riley's imagination.
And then back at home, Riley's recording a video on their phone,
What kind of video?
just them sketching. And as they're sketching, a shadow falls across the page.
Ooh, creepy.
And then you hear the snarl and the whisper again. Ray!
It followed them home.
It's like whatever was at Cape Lookout attached itself to Riley.
Oh, God, that's terrifying.
And the weirdest part,
What?
the phone didn't record any of it.
So there's no proof.
Place Riley's word.
And the shadow and the snarl and the whisper.
So Riley starts researching Cape Lookout.
Okay.
And they find all these stories about a park ranger who vanished in 1968.
Vanished.
Yeah, disappeared without a trace. And all these reports of people hearing strange howls.
Like the ones Riley heard.
Yeah, and people finding names scratched into places that are almost impossible to reach.
Like the name on the van.
And then Riley talks to their cousin Alex again.
About the phone call.
Yeah, and Alex confirms that the call did cut out suddenly.
So it wasn't just the phone malfunctioning or something.
Right, and Alex admits that something strange happened to them at Cape Lookout too.
Really?
Yeah, they heard their name called.
Oh, wow. So it's not just Riley.
This place has a history.
Yeah, a long history of weirdness.
And it's still happening.
So what does this all mean for Riley?
Well, they're living in fear, constantly looking over their shoulder.
That's awful.
And then one day they find this twig on their doorstep.
a twig.
Yeah, and it has RI scratched into it.
Chill.
And it's damp, like it was just left there.
Like a calling card.
And Alex sees it and freaks out.
Like really freaks out.
Yeah, like they know something's really wrong.
So it's not just a prank.
No, this is serious.
And then
A few days later, it rains. Riley hears it again.
the whisper
Yeah, faint but clear, coming from the wall.
through the wall.
Like it's right there in the house with them.
Oh, God, that's terrifying.
It's like whatever was at Cape Lookout is still with Riley.
And it's not going away.
So there you have it, Riley's story.
It's a lot to process.
But what do you think? Could it all be in their head?
I mean, it's possible, right?
Yeah.
Stress isolation?
The power of suggestion, those local legends.
Maybe it all got to them.
But the physical evidence
Yeah, the claw marks the twig.
is Alex's experience.
It's hard to dismiss all of that.
It really is.
Maybe there's something else going on.
something we don't understand.
Something out there in the wilderness
Something that calls to people.
by name.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. It makes you wonder what else is out there.
What mysteries are hidden in the dark places of the world?
And what happens when we stumble upon them
I guess that's for each of us to consider.
as we head out into the wilderness.
Or even just as we lie in bed at night listening to the sounds of the world around us.
Because maybe we're not as alone as we think we are.
Maybe something's always listening. Hey, welcome in. I really appreciate you joining me for this, this deep dive. We're going to get into something pretty unsettling today, a firsthand account that really kind of sticks with you.
It does, yeah, it does.
So we're diving into this story about this woman named Ava and this really strange night that she had at Beverly Beach State Park in Oregon.
Right. You gave us access to, excerpts from her personal writing.
Yeah, she wrote about it. It started out as like a nice, quiet RV trip. You know the kind.
Yeah.
Solo trip. But things went really, really sideways. It got dark.
Yeah, it did.
Fast.
It did.
And, we're not going to solve anything here. We're not going to be able to tell you what really happened. But we're going to get into the specifics,
Yeah.
her experience, what she went through. We want to think about, the things that happened, maybe why they happened, and why this story just kind of gets under your skin. Yeah, I agree. It is unsettling. So let's just start at the beginning. Ava kind of sets the scene. She tells us, who she is and why this trip was so important. She's in her early 30s, and she really loves those, solo trips
Yeah?
in her RV, which is a 2008 Winnebago View named Seeker.
Seeker.
Seeker, yeah. And it sounds like Seeker is like more than just a vehicle to her. It's her sanctuary,
100%.
She can just kind of, get away, especially after dealing with some family stuff,
Yeah.
Needed a break.
Yeah, for sure.
And so she picked Beverly Beach State Park.
Up on the coast. Oregon coast.
Yeah, Oregon coast, yeah.
Just north of Newport.
A little bit north of Newport.
Yeah.
And even just the place, like as you're listening to this,
Oh, yeah.
you kind of get this image in your mind, right? Ava talks about reading this travel blog, described it as like this really perfect spot, wide open beach, tall pine trees, those classic like Pacific Northwest trees. And then the campsites are just tucked in between.
Between the trees and the ocean.
Even the woods and the ocean, right off of Highway 101.
Classic Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And it's funny, right? Because it's like, that's exactly what she wanted. Peace.
Yeah.
Quiet. Solitude.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it, I don't know, the contrast, right? Like, that makes what happens next even more jarring.
I know. And she has this thing she does at the beginning of every trip in Seeker.
Oh, yeah.
She puts this necklace on the dashboard. It was her aunt's, her Aunt June. It's this seashell necklace, like a small spiral shell on a leather cord.
I can picture that. Yeah.
Yeah. And her aunt gave it to her when she was just a kid, 10 years old. And she told her, and I quote, "It'll keep you close, Avie."
Avie.
Yeah, and it's just this little detail, but But for Ava, it clearly means something, like a connection
Yeah.
to someone who cared about her.
Right, like a little bit of safety, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Comfort.
And that necklace, that nickname,
Right.
Avi. Keep that in mind
Okay.
as we go, because it's kind of a through line, her personal history, and she's on this trip alone, right?
Okay.
Maybe she was looking for, I don't know, maybe some protection, maybe just a feeling of not being alone.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so first night, she gets to Beverly Beach, and it's Oregon coast, classic weather.
Gotta be raining.
Raining, yeah, starts coming down, hitting the top of Seeker.
I can hear it.
Yeah. And she parks, like, near the trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the ocean just kind of rumbling beyond the dunes. And at first, she's soothed by
Are
it.
you peaceful?
Yeah, makes some coffee, starts writing in her journal, feeling that rhythm, waves crashing.
Yeah, I get that. It is soothing.
Yeah. It sounds just like a peaceful, classic RV trip.
Until it isn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Because it doesn't last. That peace, that quiet. It's like, things get really weird, like really quiet.
Ugh.
And she notices it. Like all the sounds you'd normally hear, they're just gone. No seagulls, no branches rustling, just the rain
And the ocean.
and the ocean. Yeah. Just this kind of like steady beating rhythm.
Like a heartbeat almost.
Yeah, and she even says that they sound almost too together.
Too perfect.
Too perfect, too deliberate, like it's on purpose.
Creepy.
But at first, she tries to explain it away, just a bad storm, right?
makes sense.
She keeps writing, tries to calm down, and that's when it happens. She hears it.
Here's what is it?
A voice whispering her name, well, her nickname.
Avi.
Avi, yeah.
Oh wow.
Super soft. Like she describes it as dripping, coming from the beach. And the thing is, she knows that voice.
Really?
Yeah,
Who is it?
it's her Aunt June.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
The aunt who gave her the necklace.
Yeah. But she's been dead for 8 years, and the voice is getting closer.
Like moving toward the RV.
Yeah, like through it almost. I don't know. And this triggers something in Ava, this deep fear she always has,
What kind of fear?
of being watched. Yeah, just like this feeling of being seen when she's vulnerable. Says she's always had it, even as a kid.
I get that.
Yeah. So she grabs her phone, starts recording, tries to rationalize it. Like she actually says out loud, it's the tide.
Oh gosh, she's trying to convince herself.
I know. But then later she listens to the recording, and it's not just the storm. She hears Avi again, but it's like mixed with this bubbling hiss, like someone trying to talk underwater. It's really creepy.
So it's not just in her head. She actually caught it on the recording.
Right.
Wow. That would freak me out.
And the weird stuff doesn't stop there. She like checks all the locks on the RV like instinctively.
Just to be sure.
Yeah, just to be safe. But then she sees something even weirder. The seashell necklace. The one from her aunt.
The one on the dashboard.
Yeah, it's on the floor now. And she's like adamant. She didn't touch it. Like it moved on its own.
Yeah. It's like little things start happening.
Yeah.
Messing with her.
Yeah, and that's when the little things get to you.
And then she remembers something. This cashier at this bait shop in Newport.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she was warning her about Beverly Beach, like, don't camp too close to the shore. There are watchers. And at the time, Ava thought, oh, local stories, whatever.
Like just a quirky thing.
Yeah. But now it's different. It's like maybe the cashier knew something.
Right, like a warning.
A warning, yeah. Like there's more to this place than meets the eye.
Than she thought.
Than she thought, exactly.
Yeah.
And then she finds this park pamphlet. And there's this little blurb about this old fishing shack. They abandoned it like decades ago. Back in 71.
71. After some strange sightings, that's what it says. Strange sightings. And someone wrote in the margin, like by hand, they wrote, "They don't let go." Like just this chilling little note.
Oh, that sends chills down my spine. Just thinking about it.
And she hasn't slept. And the rain is just coming down harder and harder. That constant drumming, like another presence.
Isolating.
Yeah. So she winds up this old clock, belonged to her aunt, just to have something familiar, something comforting.
Yeah, ticking.
Yeah, but even that gets messed up. The ticking slows down, like it's struggling, and then it just stops. And then she hears the voice again. This time it's clear. And it says, and I quote, "You're not safe."
Gosh, that's direct.
Right. And then things start moving. Her journal slides across the table. The pages start flipping. like by themselves.
No.
Yeah, and then she feels this tapping on the window, light but wet, like dripping fingers.
Oh God, no. That is nightmare fuel.
I know, right? And she's trapped. She can't get out.
What do you mean, like literally trapped?
Yeah, so she tries to leave, like get in Seeker and just drive away.
Yeah, yeah.
But the engine won't start. Just cranks and dies. All the power in the RV is gone.
No way.
And her phone, no signal. The battery dies almost instantly.
Oh, so she's really alone now. Totally cut off.
Totally. And the storm's raging, you know? She yells out, "Get away!" But it's like the waves just get louder, like they're mocking her.
Oh, man.
Then her motion sensor light turns on outside. And there's this figure on the edge of the dunes. She can see it on the little monitor. Slumped over, just soaked with rain. And its eyes, they're just fixed on Seeker.
Staring right at her.
Staring right at her.
Oh, that's terrifying.
She tries to call for help, uses her CB radio to contact her sister, Mara. She lives in Eugene, but all she gets is this garbled mess before it cuts out completely.
Nothing is working.
Nothing. And then she hears knocking again. This time it's different. 2 slow taps. Tap, tap. And she knows what that means.
What is that?
It was her aunt's signal when she brought Ava seashells as a kid.
Oh, like a nice memory.
Yeah. But not now.
No.
Now it's terrifying.
Like it's mocking her.
Yeah, like something is playing with her. And then she peeks through the blinds,
You know, I wouldn't. I don't think I could.
and it's there, that figure just standing in the rain, staring. And then she finds this carving under the table, her nickname, AVE, scratched into the wood. It's damp, Sandy, like a claw did it.
A claw.
Yeah, and the knocking, it gets worse, like pounding now, shaking a whole RV. She grabs the seashell necklace, like it might protect her. And then she decides she's not going to be a victim.
Good for her.
She thinks about her aunt, how strong she was. She grabs this flashlight and a tire iron.
Yeah.
And she yells, "I'm not yours!" And everything stops. Just silence.
Did it work?
She opens the door, goes outside, tire iron raised. But the figure is gone. But there are these marks in the sand. Big claw marks dragging down towards the ocean. And then she sees something in the waves. Long, dark. Just a glimpse. And it's gone.
What was it? What did she see?
We don't know. She doesn't say. She goes back inside thinking maybe it's finally over. But then she looks at the monitor, the one for the motion sensor light, and it's playing this message by itself. It says, "You let me in." And then that voice, that wet, hollow voice, right in her ear almost.
Oh, that is so creepy. Like it's inside with her now.
And then she remembers more of her aunt's stories about Beverly Beach, local fishermen talking about feeling watched out on the water. Some even got pulled under, they say. And her aunt, she was always kind of amused by those stories, but also like scared.
Like she knew something.
Yeah, like she knew something. And then she hears it again, that clawing on the side of the RV. This time it's not knocking, it's attacking. She hits the wall with the tire iron, trying to scare it off. But then there's this screeching sound, like claws on metal.
Okay.
And this wail, high-pitched like nothing human. She looks down at the seashell necklace, and she sees a reflection with me. But there's something else in the reflection, behind her, inside the RV. She turns, throws the tire iron, but there's nothing there. And then the clock starts ticking. It hadn't been wound up. And the voice says, "You'll never breathe free." Ava smashes the clock.
Got it.
And the dawn comes, and Seeker just starts right up, like nothing happened. She gets out of there fast as she can.
I bet I would too. But it's not over, is it?
No, it's not. When she gets back to Eugene, she finds sand on her bed and these little claw prints all around it, inside her house. Whatever it was, it followed her home. And then there's this phone recording. She didn't even remember making it. She was writing in the dark. And you can hear this wet hissing right next to her, saying, "AV."
No way. So it was there, in the house, with her.
And then later, she finds these marks on her neck, scars, faint but like raw, the same shape as the claw marks on the dune.
So it was real. It touched her.
She starts researching, looking into Beverly Beach. And there are these stories, rumors, local legends about people disappearing, strange things happening. Her sister, Mara, she remembers that she also felt watched at Beverly Beach years ago, never told Ava. And then Ava finds this piece of kelp under her door with AVE scratched into it.
Oh my God. No.
Yeah.
So she burns it.
Yeah, she burns it, but she's still terrified. Every time it rains, she hears that voice, "AV," like it's right there in the walls.
So what do we think happened here?
Well, you know, it's up to you, really, the listener. What do you think? I mean, there's the voice, the marks, the fact that it knew her nickname, her aunt's signal.
And the carvings, don't forget the
Yeah,
carvings.
it was intelligent.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Was it something supernatural? Ghosts? Spirits? Or was it all in her head? Stress, isolation. Maybe those stories she grew up with, they got to her.
Well, maybe it was something else. Something we don't have a name for. Something connected to the ocean.
And then there's the missing person from 71. And those stories about the watchers in the water, it's all so strange.
It really is.
So, think about it. What do you find the most disturbing or the most important? The nickname, the necklace, the fact that it happened at Beverly Beach, a place with all these stories. Maybe it's all connected somehow. Personal history, local legends. It really makes you think.
It does. And we can't give you answers. We just don't have them. But Ava's story, it reminds us that sometimes the most interesting stories, the scariest stories, they're the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
And I think that's a good place to leave it for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay safe out there, especially on the Oregon coast.
And keep the lights on.
Yeah, and maybe stay away from the water.
Definitely.
We'll see you next time.